When my husband told me he wanted space, I thought he just needed time to breathe. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, even though my heart was breaking inside. You see, after 22 years of marriage, silence had become our language. We didn't fight. We just stopped talking. Our home used to be full of laughter, the kind that echoes through walls, that carries the smell of breakfast and children's chatter. But somewhere between bills, responsibilities, and pride, we lost that sound. And maybe, just maybe, we lost each other too. I still remember that evening. He stood near the door, suitcase by his side, his face hard but his eyes tired. He said, "I just can't do this anymore." And I, foolishly trying to be strong, whispered, "I understand." But I didn't. I didn't understand how love could fade without a fight. How a man who once held my hand so tightly could now walk away without turning back. I waited for him to look at me, to see me. But his ego stood taller than our memories. And so he left. The sound of the door closing that day still lives in my mind. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. Too quiet, like the sound of something ending but no one daring to admit it. For days I told myself he'd come back. That he just needed space to miss me. That he'd realize no pride is worth losing a family. But as the days turned into weeks, the space between us grew wider. His silence became his answer. And my hope began to shrink. Sometimes I still catch myself setting 2 cups of tea instead of 1. Sometimes I still glance at the gate, waiting to hear his car. But what hurts most is realizing how easily pride can take away everything love once built. They say time heals everything. But what they don't tell you is, time also teaches you what you were blind to see. And for me, it took losing my home, my husband, and almost myself, to finally understand that love doesn't die from hate. It dies from silence. That was the night my life quietly changed. The night I realized that sometimes, the greatest distance isn't miles apart. It's sleeping beside someone who's already gone. The morning after he left, the rain had stopped. The world outside looked washed clean, but inside, everything still felt stained with emptiness. I stood by the window and watched the sunlight struggle to break through the clouds. The house looked the same walls, the same furniture, the same clock ticking on the wall. But somehow nothing felt familiar anymore. The silence was heavy. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that reminded you someone was missing. Every sound felt louder. The creak of the wooden floor, the kettle whistling, even my own breathing. It was strange how the absence of one person could change the air in a home. I walked into the kitchen and found his favorite mug still on the shelf. The one with the chipped handle and faded letters that read "World's Best Dad." I smiled, though it hurt. He used to joke that it wasn't true anymore because our kids were grown and barely called. But I knew he cherished that cup. He was never the kind of man to say much, but small things, like that mug, told me more than his words ever did. We had built this home together, brick by brick, dream by dream. When we first moved in, the walls echoed with our laughter and plans for the future. I remember the night we painted the bedroom, how we both ended up with white paint on our hair and faces, laughing until we couldn't breathe. Those were simple times, but they were ours. As the years passed, life got busier. He worked long hours and I learned to fill my days around his schedule. I raised our children, cooked our meals, kept the house running. He provided, but somewhere along the way we stopped really talking. Not arguing, just not talking. At first I didn't notice it. The quiet between us felt normal, comfortable even. But comfort can be dangerous when it replaces connection. Little things began to change. He'd come home late, tired, eyes glued to his phone. Dinner would sit on the table until it went cold. We'd exchange short sentences. "Long day." "Yeah." "Want tea?" "No, I'm fine." And then the silence again. Sometimes I would look at him and wonder what he was thinking. There was a time when I could read his thoughts just by looking into his eyes. Now they seemed distant, like a locked door I no longer had the key to. Our children grew up and moved away. The house that once burst with noise became too quiet, too neat, too still. We both started aging quietly in our corners of the same home, like 2 old trees growing apart in the same soil. I tried to reach out in small ways. I'd cook his favorite meals, suggest we take a walk, or ask about his work. But he'd give short answers, polite smiles, and go back to his phone or the TV. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I had become boring. Maybe I had stopped trying. But deep down I knew it wasn't about effort. It was about pride. He carried his pride like armor. He wanted to be right always. If something went wrong, he would grow quiet instead of apologizing. And I let him. I thought keeping peace was more important than speaking up. I told myself that silence meant love. But silence, I learned, is not peace. It's distance disguised as calm. There were moments when I thought he might open up. Like the night his company downsized and he lost a project he had worked hard for. He came home defeated, his shoulders slumped. I wanted to hold him, tell him we'd be okay. But when I reached out, he brushed it off. "I'm fine," he said. "I don't need sympathy." His tone wasn't angry, just cold. That was the moment I realized how fragile we had become. He was hurting and I was right there, but he wouldn't let me in. And maybe over time I stopped knocking. We still had our routines. Morning tea together, though mostly in silence. Sitting in the same room but living in different worlds. Nights spent beside each other but miles apart in thought. If someone had seen us from outside, they'd think we were fine. A quiet, stable couple. But inside we were fading. One evening, while dusting the living room shelves, I found an old family photo. The four of us, me, him, and our two kids, smiling on a picnic blanket, sunlight glowing on our faces. He had his arm around me in that picture. We looked so happy, so close. I sat down and stared at that photo for a long time. Tears came without warning. It wasn't sadness for what we had lost. It was sadness for not realizing when we lost it. That night I tried to talk to him. I told him I missed us. The laughter, the warmth, the small things. He nodded, distracted, not looking up from his phone. I remember saying softly, "Do you still love me?" He looked at me for a second, then said, "You know I do." Why ask? But his eyes didn't match his words. After that I stopped asking. I began to fill my evenings with quiet routines. Folding laundry, watering plants, cleaning cupboards that didn't need cleaning. It was my way of keeping the silence from swallowing me whole. Sometimes when he wasn't home, I'd play old songs on the radio, the ones we used to dance to. I'd close my eyes and try to remember how it felt to be held by him, to belong somewhere. But memories, I realized, can be cruel when you're lonely. They remind you of everything that's gone, but they can't bring it back. Our children visited once in a while and I always tried to make everything look perfect. The food, the smiles, the atmosphere. I didn't want them to see the cracks. They loved their father deeply and I didn't want to be the reason they saw him differently. So I kept pretending. Pretending we were fine. Pretending silence was peace. Pretending love could survive on memories alone. Until one day that pretending fell apart. It started with something small. A disagreement about money, something that didn't even matter. But pride once again stood in the way. His tone turned sharp. Mine grew defensive. Words we had swallowed for years began to spill out. Not in anger but in exhaustion. That argument, though small, became the spark that would eventually burn everything we had left. But at that moment I didn't know it yet. I just stood there, heart pounding, staring at the man I had loved all my life and realizing how far we had drifted from where we began. Outside, the wind was picking up again, shaking the trees, whispering against the windows. Inside, a different kind of storm was gathering. Quiet, slow, but unstoppable. And deep down I knew, something was about to change forever. The days that followed that small argument were heavier than I expected. It wasn't the words we said that hurt. It was the ones we didn't. He stopped talking to me completely, as if silence could erase what happened. The house felt colder, the air tense. Even the walls seemed to listen carefully, waiting for someone to speak first. I tried to fix it in my own quiet way. I made his favorite curry one evening and waited for him to come home. I set the table, lit a small candle like I used to when we were younger. When he walked in, he barely glanced at me. He sat, ate quietly, thanked me and went to his room. That thank you, it should have comforted me, but it didn't. It sounded like a stranger's politeness, not a husband's warmth. I lay awake that night listening to the clock tick. Each second sounded louder, sharper. I thought about how two people can live in the same space, sleep in the same bed, yet feel worlds apart. I wanted to reach out, but my pride held me back. I told myself, he should speak first. He's the one who changed. But the truth was, I was changing too, into someone who was tired of waiting. The next morning we barely exchanged words. He left early for work and I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the road. I whispered, "Drive safe," but only the wind heard me. The days turned into weeks and that silence hardened into something heavier, resentment. Not anger, not hatred, just a quiet, bitter ache that settled between us like a wall made of pride. Sometimes I caught him staring at me from across the room. Not with love, not even with dislike, but with confusion, as if he couldn't understand what went wrong either. We both wanted to fix it, I think, but neither of us knew how to take the first step. Or maybe we were both too stubborn to try. One afternoon, while cleaning his study, I found a small piece of paper tucked inside a book. A note he had written years ago. It said, "To my wife, thank you for building this life with me. I may not say it often, but you are my strength." I stared at those words for a long time, tracing the faded ink with my finger. It was his handwriting, strong, steady. The man who wrote that was not the same man I lived with now. I placed the note back where I found it and quietly walked out, feeling something heavy settle inside my chest. That evening I asked him, "Do you remember when you used to leave little notes for me?" He looked up briefly from his phone and said, "That was a long time ago." Just 6 words. 6 words that hurt more than any argument ever could. Over the next few weeks I noticed he spent more time outside. Late nights at work, meetings, just friends from the office. I didn't ask questions. Maybe I should have, but I didn't want to sound controlling. Besides, when you've been ignored long enough, you stop expecting answers. One night he came home late again. The clock showed nearly midnight. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read, though I hadn't turned a page in half an hour. When he walked in, I asked softly, "Did you eat?" He sighed, tired. "Don't start again, please." "I'm not starting anything," I replied. "I just asked." I said I'm fine. That was the end of the conversation. I remember looking at him, his face weary, his voice distant, and feeling like I was looking at a stranger wearing my husband's clothes. As weeks passed, our children noticed something was off. Our daughter called one evening and said, "Mom, are you and Dad okay? You both sound different." I lied. I said we were fine. I told her we were just busy. Because how could I explain that we were falling apart without a single fight? That winter was colder than usual. I kept the heater on and cooked warm soups, hoping it would bring some comfort. But the real cold was not in the weather. It was in his eyes, in the quiet way he passed me by without seeing me. One Sunday morning we were both in the living room, each lost in our own silence. I finally gathered the courage to speak. "Are we okay?" I asked quietly. He didn't look up from his newspaper. "Why wouldn't we be?" "Because you don't talk to me anymore." He turned a page. "There's nothing to talk about." Those words hit me like ice water. Nothing to talk about. 22 years of love, struggle, and shared life, reduced to nothing to talk about. That was the first time I felt something inside me truly break. That evening I walked outside to the backyard. The sky was turning orange with sunset, the air still. I could hear the faint sound of children playing somewhere down the street. For a moment I wished I could go back in time, to the days when our biggest worry was paying rent or buying groceries, when love was simple and didn't need words. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Please God, give me a sign." The wind picked up just then, carrying the smell of rain. I took it as a small comfort, maybe not a sign but a reminder that even storms pass eventually. But ours didn't. A week later it happened, the argument that became the turning point. It started with something as small as a misplaced bill. He accused me of forgetting to pay it. I said he never gave it to me. Voices didn't rise, they just grew colder, sharper. Each word felt like a door closing between us. He said, "You always make things difficult." I replied, "No, you just never listen." He said, "Maybe because there's nothing worth listening to anymore." That sentence sliced through me. I stood frozen, unable to respond. My throat burned, but no tears came. After a long pause I said quietly, "You've changed." He looked at me and his expression softened for a second. "Maybe we both have." Then he walked away. That night he didn't come to bed. He slept in the guest room. The space beside me felt wider than ever before. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, wondering how we had gone from 2 lovers who couldn't sleep apart to 2 strangers who couldn't sleep together. Over the next few days I tried to reach him again, gently, without pride this time. I made tea and brought it to him in the study. I asked if we could talk. He said he was tired. Always tired. Tired from work, tired from life, tired from me. So I stopped trying. I began to live quietly. I cooked, cleaned, smiled when necessary. But inside something was shutting down. I realized I was preparing myself for the possibility that he might leave. Not because I wanted him to, but because I could feel it coming. And then one evening it happened. He came home earlier than usual, his face unreadable. He didn't sit down or change his clothes. He just stood near the doorway, his eyes distant. I wiped my hands on my apron and looked at him, waiting. "I think I need some space," he said finally. The words hung in the air like smoke. "Space," I repeated softly. He nodded. "I don't want to fight. I need time to think." I felt my chest tighten. Time to think about what? He hesitated. About us. About everything. For a moment neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly between us. Then I asked quietly, "And if you decide you don't want this anymore?" He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I turned away before he could see the tears gathering in my eyes. "If that's what you need," I whispered, "then go." He looked at me for a moment longer, then picked up his suitcase. I didn't ask where he was going. Maybe to a friend's place, maybe somewhere alone. I just stood there, frozen, as he walked out. The sound of the door closing that night wasn't loud. It was soft but final. The rain started soon after, tapping gently against the windows. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the empty space where his shoes used to be. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Only silence. Deep, endless silence. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Low, distant, almost like a whisper. Inside, my heart echoed that same sound. The first night without him was the hardest. I kept thinking I heard the front gate open, the key turn, his familiar footsteps. But it was only the wind brushing against the trees. The bed felt enormous. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain return, and wondered how two people who once promised forever could end up like this. Silent, distant, unfinished. Days passed, slow and heavy. I moved through the house like a shadow. The routine stayed the same. Tea at 6, sweeping the floor, folding the laundry. But without him there, everything felt hollow. Neighbors began to notice. One morning Mrs. Khan from next door knocked and asked softly, "Is everything all right, dear? I haven't seen your husband around." I smiled, the kind of smile that hides pain. "He's visiting a friend for a while." She nodded with the polite sympathy people use when they sense a truth they shouldn't touch. Inside I was still waiting. Waiting for a message, a phone call, a sign that he missed me. But days became weeks and my phone stayed silent. Then one evening, after nearly 3 weeks, I saw his name flash on the screen. My heart leapt. He had texted, "Can we talk?" I typed back before I could think. Of course. He came the next day. The sky was gray again, the air heavy with the smell of rain. When I opened the door, he looked tired. Not angry, not sad. Just tired, like a man who had been running from something and realized he couldn't outrun himself. We sat in the living room. For a few minutes no one spoke. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. Finally he said, "I needed time to clear my head." I nodded. "Did it help?" He shrugged. "A little. But I still don't know where we went wrong." That sentence stung. Because I knew where we went wrong. We stopped choosing each other. "I think we both forgot how to listen," I said quietly. He looked away. "Maybe." We talked for a while, about the children, about the bills, about ordinary things. Not about love, not about forgiveness. It felt like two colleagues discussing work, not two people who once shared a heartbeat. Before leaving, he said, "I'll stay at my brother's for now. I don't want to make things uncomfortable." I nodded again. That was all I seemed to do those days. Nod and pretend it didn't hurt. After he left, I realized the saddest part wasn't that he was gone. It was that his return hadn't changed anything. A month later, I heard from our son that his father wasn't doing well. He had been missing work, drinking more than usual, sleeping on the couch at his brother's place. My heart twisted. No matter what happened, I still cared. Love doesn't vanish, it just changes shape. I decided to visit. When I arrived, he looked surprised. He was sitting by the window, staring out at the rain. His hair was unkempt, his eyes red. "I brought some soup," I said softly. He blinked, almost ashamed. "You didn't have to." "I know," I replied. "But I wanted to." He took the bowl from me but didn't eat. We sat in silence, listening to the rain. After a while he whispered, "I didn't think you'd come." I said, "Neither did I." Something in his expression shifted. A flicker of the man I once knew. He said quietly, "I keep thinking about our life. I don't know why I felt so trapped. Maybe I just wanted to feel important again." I looked at him, waiting. He went on, voice trembling slightly. "All these years I thought being strong meant never admitting weakness. But now I see, strength isn't silence. It's being able to say you're wrong. My eyes burned. That was the first honest thing he had said to me in a very long time. We didn't fix everything that day. But something small and fragile started to thaw. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was clear for once, sunlight spilling through the kitchen window. I was watering the plants when my phone rang. An unknown number. A hospital voice. An accident. A car had run a red light. He was hurt, not critical but serious. My hands shook as I grabbed my bag and rushed out. On the way, memories flooded back. His laugh, our children's birthdays, the smell of his cologne when he hugged me goodbye. At the hospital, I found him lying in a bed, a bandage around his arm, scratches on his face. He looked small, fragile. When he saw me, his eyes filled instantly. I didn't know who else to call, he said weakly. I took his hand. You did the right thing. The doctor said he was lucky. No broken bones, just bruises and shock. But I could tell something deeper had broken inside him. The wall he had built with pride. That night as he rested, I sat by his bed and watched him sleep. Machines beeped softly, rhythmic like a lullaby. For the first time in months I felt peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because life had slowed him down long enough to see what really mattered. When he woke, I was still there. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I thought I'd die without telling you I'm sorry, he whispered. I pressed his hand gently. You're still here. That's enough. He swallowed hard. I kept choosing my pride over you. Over everything. And for what? I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is kinder than words. He cried then, quietly ashamed. I had never seen him cry before. He came home 2 days later, not to his brothers but to our house. I made soup again, the same one he never ate last time. This time he finished it. We didn't talk about forgiveness that night. We just sat together listening to the rain outside. But the silence between us had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, healing. Over the next weeks he began to help around the house again. Small things. Fixing the leaky tap, sweeping the porch, making morning tea. One morning he left a note on the fridge. It said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I read it 3 times, my hands trembling. Life, it seemed, had taught him what my words never could. A few months later our daughter visited. She looked surprised to see us laughing over breakfast. "Everything okay now?" she asked with a teasing smile. He reached over, took my hand gently and said, "We're learning." That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, we sat outside under the stars. The air smelled of wet earth. The night was peaceful. He said softly, "I keep thinking about that night I left. I thought walking away would give me peace. But it didn't. It just made me see what I was throwing away." I listened quietly. He continued, "All my life I wanted to be right. I didn't realize that being right means nothing if it costs you the person who always stood by you." I turned to him and said, "We both made mistakes." He shook his head. "Maybe. But mine nearly destroyed everything." We sat there for a long time without words, just the sound of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. Sometimes love doesn't need apologies shouted out loud. It just needs 2 hearts that finally understand. As days went by, things didn't become perfect, but they became softer. We still had moments of silence, but now they were comfortable. He started joining me for morning walks again, pointing out the birds, the sunrise, the small things we used to notice when life was simpler. One morning he said, "Do you think we can start over?" I smiled. "We already did." He laughed softly. "You always find the right words." "No," I replied. "I just stopped running from the wrong ones." But life has its way of testing even the lessons it teaches. One evening I found an old envelope in his drawer, a letter he had written but never sent. It was addressed to me, dated months before the accident. With trembling hands I opened it. It said, "I don't know who we are anymore. I feel lost, like I'm living beside a stranger. I miss you but I don't know how to reach you. Maybe leaving will wake us up. Maybe distance will remind us what we've forgotten." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back. He had been drowning long before I realized. Maybe we both were. That night I sat beside him while he slept, the moonlight soft across his face. And I whispered, "You don't need to leave to be found." He stirred slightly as if he heard me in his dreams. Sometimes I wonder if the accident was fate's way of stopping us before it was too late. Life has a strange way of speaking when we refuse to listen. For us, it spoke through silence, distance, and pain, until we finally heard. That was the turning point. Not a dramatic reunion, not tears and promises, but quiet understanding. Two tired souls finally realizing that love isn't about being right. It's about staying when it's hard. From that day our home felt alive again. Not loud, not perfect, but peaceful. And in that peace I found something even greater than love. I found gratitude. The morning after the accident changed everything. Something felt different in our house. Not in a loud way, not like laughter suddenly filled the walls again, but in a quiet, almost sacred way. It was in the way he looked at the teacup before drinking as if it was something precious. It was in the way he asked how I slept and actually waited for my answer. It was in the way he paused before speaking. A man learning to listen again. We didn't talk about the past much. The hurt was still there, but we carried it differently now. Not as a weapon but as a reminder. The first real step toward healing didn't come from grand words or dramatic apologies. It came on a Sunday morning. I was cooking breakfast when I heard soft music playing in the living room. It was our old playlist, the one we used to listen to when we first got married. He was sitting there, phone in hand, staring at a picture of us from years ago. Young, smiling, unafraid. I leaned against the doorway and said quietly, "You still have that picture?" He looked up, surprised, then smiled shyly. "I never deleted it. I just forgot how to look at it." We sat together listening to the old songs. No words, just memories. And in that silence, something inside me softened. The part that had been waiting for him to remember who we were. That week he started helping me in the kitchen again. He chopped vegetables too big, spilled the salt once or twice, but I didn't mind. We laughed about it, really laughed, and for the first time in months it didn't feel forced. He began saying thank you for small things. Thank you for the tea. Thank you for the clean clothes. Thank you for staying. Strange. The things you take for granted become the very things that rebuild you. One evening he brought home a small potted plant. It wasn't anything fancy, just a green money plant in a cracked clay pot. "I saw it at the market," he said. "Thought it might look nice by the window." I looked at the plant, then at him, and realized this was his way of saying let's start again. He didn't say sorry that day. He didn't have to. Every small gesture, every cup of tea, every shared smile, was an apology that spoke louder than words. We began to rebuild our routine slowly. Dinner together. Evening walks. Sunday visits to the children. At first it felt like walking on glass. Careful, cautious, unsure where to step. But with time the fear faded, replaced by something gentler. One night during dinner he said quietly, "You know, I was afraid to come home. I thought you'd stopped loving me." I looked at him and said, "I did stop for a while. But love is stubborn. It waits quietly until you remember it." He smiled, tears shining in his eyes. "Then I'm glad it waited." Months later we visited our daughter's house for her birthday. The whole family was there. Laughter, noise, children running around. At one point someone asked jokingly, "Uncle, how do you and Auntie stay together this long?" He paused, looked at me, then said something that silenced the room. He said, "Because she forgave me when I didn't deserve it." Everyone laughed lightly, not realizing how deep those words really went. But I felt them, like a prayer whispered between two souls who had survived a storm. Later that night as we drove home he said softly, "You know, I used to think marriage was about finding the right person. Now I think it's about becoming the right person." I turned to him and smiled. "And what are we now?" He chuckled, "Still learning. But I think we're better students than before." It was a quiet evening when the power went out. No lights, no TV, just the sound of crickets and rain tapping softly outside. I lit a few candles and placed them on the table. He brought out his old guitar, the one he hadn't touched in years. He strummed a few chords, rusty but tender. Then he looked at me and said, "Do you remember the song I sang for you when we got engaged?" I nodded. "You forgot half the lyrics." He laughed. "Still do." He started singing anyway, softly, off-key but full of emotion. I sat there, tears in my eyes, realizing that love doesn't return in grand gestures. It returns in moments like that, small, unpolished, real. When the lights came back we didn't turn them on. We stayed in the glow of candlelight because for the first time in years, the darkness felt safe. Spring arrived quietly. The little plant he brought home had started to grow, new leaves curling toward the light. He began tending it every morning, watering it with care. One day he said, It's strange how something can look dead and still find a way to grow again. I knew he wasn't talking about the plant. By summer, the plant had grown strong and green, reaching across the window like hope finally stretching its arms. It became our silent symbol, proof that some things don't need to be perfect to keep living. One morning I found a folded paper on the dining table. It was a letter written in his uneven handwriting. It said, "You once told me silence can destroy love. You were right. I built walls with my pride and hid behind them thinking I was strong. But all I did was trap myself in loneliness. You waited. You endured. You didn't shout. You just stayed. That kind of love. I don't think I'll ever deserve it. But I promise I'll never take it for granted again." I didn't cry immediately. I just folded the letter, pressed it to my heart and whispered, "Thank you." Because sometimes closure isn't the end of something. It's the start of breathing again. Weeks later, during our evening walk, he asked suddenly, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought for a while. Then I said, "If things hadn't broken, we wouldn't have learned how to fix them. Maybe this was the only way we'd finally listen." He nodded slowly. "You're right. The silence destroyed us, but it also taught us what not to lose again." We walked the rest of the way holding hands, something we hadn't done in years. It felt new and yet it felt like coming home. Months turned into a year. The air between us was no longer heavy. We talked, we laughed, we sometimes disagreed, but never like before. One morning I woke up to the smell of tea. He had already made breakfast. He smiled and said, "Stay in bed today. I'll handle everything." It was such a small thing, but it made me realize how far we'd come. Later, as we sat by the window watching the rain again, that same rain that once marked our distance, he said softly, "I used to hate the rain. Now I think it saved us." I smiled. Maybe it washed away what we didn't need anymore. He nodded. And left what mattered. If someone had told me a year ago that we'd find peace again, I wouldn't have believed them. Back then we were two broken people pretending to be strong. But maybe that's what love truly is. Not avoiding the storm but learning to stand in it together. He doesn't talk as much as he used to, but when he does, it's honest. And I've learned not to fill every silence, because sometimes silence can be healing too if it's shared. We still argue sometimes, about money, about the children, about silly little things. But now, after every argument, one of us always says, "I don't want silence again." That's our promise. One evening as the sun set, he turned to me and said, "You know, we almost lost everything." I smiled faintly. "Yes. But we didn't." He took my hand. "I think we both changed. I used to think love was about never fighting. Now I think it's about never walking away." I nodded. "It's about showing up even when it hurts." He looked at me quietly for a long time, then said, "You saved me." I shook my head. "No. Life did. I just stayed long enough for you to hear it." He smiled, eyes glistening. And for the first time in years I knew we were finally okay. Our story didn't end with fireworks or tears. It ended with peace, the kind that comes after the rain when everything smells clean and new. We still live in the same small house. We still drink tea by the same window. But now when silence falls, it's no longer empty. It's full of presence, of love, of understanding. Because sometimes love doesn't need a new beginning, just a new understanding. Sometimes I sit by the window holding my cup of tea and I think about everything that happened. How close we came to losing what we spent a lifetime building. How silence nearly destroyed us. And how love, in its quiet way, found its way back. People often think love ends when two people stop fighting. But I've learned, sometimes, love ends when two people stop trying. It doesn't fade all at once. It slips away through unspoken words, unshared meals, untouched hands. That's how it almost ended for us. Not with anger. Not with betrayal. But with distance, soft, invisible and slow. I used to think forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened. Now I know forgiveness is remembering, but without the pain. It's saying, yes, it hurt, but I choose peace over pride. When he came back home from the hospital, something in both of us had changed. He was gentler. Quieter. And I learned that love isn't about always being right. It's about being there, when everything else falls apart. I often wonder how many families fall apart not because of big mistakes but because of small silences. Because someone stopped listening. Because someone's pride spoke louder than their heart. Ego, I've learned, is a thief. It steals love. It takes away laughter, understanding, forgiveness, all the little things that keep a home warm. My husband once thought being strong meant never showing weakness. Now he knows strength is being able to say, I was wrong. And I know that love doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave, brave enough to stay, to forgive, to start again. Sometimes I think back to the woman I used to be, the one who stayed silent, who thought patience alone could fix everything. I wish I could tell her this. Silence doesn't heal wounds. It only hides them. Speak your heart before the distance becomes too wide to cross. I wish I had said those words sooner. But maybe life needed to break us a little to show us what truly matters. Maybe pain was the only way we'd finally learn how to love without pride. Now every morning when the light filters through the curtains and I see him reading the newspaper by the window, I feel thankful. Not because everything is perfect, it's not. We still disagree. We still get tired. But there's warmth again. There's laughter. There's life. And sometimes when the rain starts, he'll pour 2 cups of tea and say, "Come sit. Let's just listen to the rain." And we do. We sit there in quiet peace, letting the world outside fade away. If someone were to ask me what I learned from all this, I'd say, love is not about holding on tightly. It's about holding on gently. It's not about winning arguments. It's about understanding the silence between the words. And maybe, it's about knowing when to speak and when to simply be present. So if you're listening to my story right now and you're sitting in silence with someone you love, please break it. Say what you need to say. Apologize. Forgive. Don't wait for life to teach you through pain what you can learn through kindness today. Because once the silence grows too long, even the loudest, "I'm sorry," can sound like a whisper in an empty room. Our home is quiet again now, but it's a different kind of quiet. Not the cold, lonely kind. It's the sound of peace. Sometimes I still hear echoes of our past, the arguments, the distance, the silence. But they don't hurt anymore. They remind me of how far we've come. Because love, real love, doesn't always look like fairy tales. Sometimes it looks like 2 people sitting in the same house after the storm, holding hands, and choosing to stay. He chose his ego over our home, but in the end, love taught us both the meaning of strength.